54 Warbler?
Yeah, I've got yours.
Good, good. Hi, John.
Okay, yeah, they're really busy up there. I think they've got 3 chicks hatched
Wow.
and 19 of the incubators. Well, 19 are being incubated, some in incubators, and some are being incubated by the parents.
Oh,
So they're
good.
just incredibly busy up there.
So Bill's talking about a woman who
The
works with
condors.
condors, but she also has a really amazing Instagram of her
Yeah,
yard,
she does.
And
Yeah,
the feeders and all the animals that come. So I think she's amazing.
yeah.
How are you, John?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. How's family?
They are great. Just first week back to school this week.
Yeah. Woo! Oh my gosh. Happy
Yeah.
hands. And
Yeah.
how are you sitting in the new lab? Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm kind of this is a fake background. I am in the
Oh,
lab, but this is
oh,
also a virtual
a
background. So
virtual lab.
I'm
You're
not
not
hovering in the new
in
lobby.
the lab, but you're
Yeah.
okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, this is the new mural you can see
That's
behind. We've got
beautiful.
the parrots right there.
Nice.
Yeah. Red-shouldered hawk right there.
Really
Scrub
nice.
jay somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Oh, lots of people on already. Good. Bill, thank you for that effort you're making. I really appreciate it. And you're muted, but that's okay. Hi,
Yeah,
Richard.
well, I think everybody should be able to, see what she's been doing, see her yard. Since she works with the condors
Right, right.
several times a week, I mean, she really knows what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. She's been, yeah. I watched the newest chick being hatched. The whole thing was very exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple of minutes after 7, and I think, Joanne, are you going to be doing the introductions?
Yes.
Paula, do you want to say a few words before Joanne does her?
Yeah, I just have 2 things to say,
Okay.
really brief. I wanted to say welcome to everyone who's joining in today to hear an amazing speaker. And I want to actually, if you're a member of Audubon, please look at your phainopepla and vote for our new slate of people coming in, also some old, couple new. And you can do that easily by photographing. That's your choice. You're okay on that, and emailing that. And then the last thing is keep your heads up, look at our site. Walks are starting to resume. I actually signed up to do an annual monthly walk in Franklin Canyon, which Bill joined in for the Birdathon, and it was a really great walk. So, and the last thing is we have a cleanup on June 19th. We hope you'll be there. It'll be very safe, and we can clean up Haskell Creek. Hope you join in. And that's all I have to say. I'm looking forward to tonight. Joanne, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, John. We're in for a treat tonight. John has spoken to us before, and I totally enjoyed his first talk, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. It's going to be on Los Angeles's Amazon parrots and what DNA from museum specimens can tell us about their origins, adaptation to city life, hybridization, and future as a distinct species. And Dr. McCormack is director and curator of the bird and mammal collection at the Moore Laboratory of Zoology. He's also an assistant professor of biology at Occidental College. And the Moore Lab holds the largest collection of Mexican birds in the world, 65,000 specimens in total. And researchers come to study the DNA sequencing technologies and to collect DNA from museum specimens. John McCormack received his undergraduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Arizona. He got his PhD from UCLA, and he has done research at the University of Michigan and Louisiana State University. and he recently oversaw the completion of a major remodel to the Moore Labs facilities. And with that having been said, I give you John McCormack.
John,
Thank
if
you.
I could insert myself just for
Yeah.
2 seconds here.
Yeah.
If everyone seems to be doing a great job of keeping themselves muted, please keep it up. Please submit questions via chat and we'll collate those for John at the end. So thank
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Joanne. That was great. I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. There we go. And go into full screen mode. You guys seeing that okay? Okay. Yeah, so thanks so much for the invite to speak to you today. I am going to be sort of framing the talk tonight in terms mainly focusing on the hybridization angle between these parrots in Los Angeles. Specifically, it's a bit of a mouthful, but something we call anthropogenic hybridization. So this is hybridization that is somewhat unnatural in the sense that it is caused by humans, and it has pretty big impacts. It can happen by translocation, it can happen by habitat modification or climate change. And it's often, especially when it's been studied, it happens between a native and an introduced species. One of the classic examples, and I'm sorry it's not a bird example, is between the California tiger salamander, which is an endangered species, and an introduced tiger salamander that was introduced for bait. And they started hybridizing and it became sort of a big problem for the native. Here is a bird example. This is hybridization that's happening because of habitat modifications in the breeding range between golden-winged and blue-winged warbler. So when this happens, it has evolutionary impacts that are pretty interesting to study. I'll tell you about some of those, but it also has conservation impacts, of course. And what's exciting about it for an evolutionary biologist like myself is that we've got some new genomic tools that are allowing us kind of a more detailed look at what is going on. So the Amazona parrots, the subject of the talk tonight, is sort of a different spin on anthropogenic hybridization in the sense that, yes, all of these parrots have been brought to Los Angeles, and we'll talk about how, but they're not hybridizing, obviously, with any native species. But they are hybridizing, potentially, we'll find out, don't want to give the spoiler too early, amongst themselves. And even though a native species isn't involved, there are still conservation implications. So I'll kind of leave you with that puzzler and reveal as we go along. So my talk outline is going to be to tell you a little bit about the history of the Los Angeles parrots, to talk a little bit about how they've changed their niche, their ecology, their habitat in the switch from their native range to where they are in LA. And then to talk a little bit about what DNA can tell us about their potential hybridization, and then to talk about the future of these parrots, especially with respect to conservation. I want to first acknowledge the many people that have worked on this study. This is not a solo effort. All of our work in the Moore Lab is always a big group effort. James Maley was a huge part of this research. Many diligent undergraduate students at Occidental that are listed there, and other staff and collaborators. So I'll be bringing them in as they contribute different parts. Among the many photographs I could have shown you on the next slide, I'll bet you weren't expecting to see this one. Richard Nixon emptying a hose onto a roof. This actually plays a role in the history of the parrots in Los Angeles because it marks the Bel Air fire of 1961, which not only displaced and dislocated Richard Nixon from his house and destroyed the houses of people like Burt Lancaster and Zsa Zsa Gabor, but it also engulfed several homes that contained large parrot aviaries. And right before those houses went up, they released their aviaries and released their parrots into Bel Air. And for years afterwards, these birds were seen kind of roaming the neighborhood. Unlike Zsa Zsa Gabor and Richard Nixon, the parrots elected to stay in the wild. But they weren't really the first parrots that were out there. By the mid-1950s, Fish and Wildlife had already kind of noted persisting flocks of parrots moving around the city. These weren't just ephemeral birds, ones and twos. These were flocks that seemed to stay. Another one of these great stories, that has some fact and some mythology behind it in terms of how the parrots came to be in Los Angeles, is Busch Gardens. This was, perhaps some of you in the audience may have even experienced Busch Gardens. This was an amusement park that paired beer tastings from the Anheuser-Busch Company with exotic bird aviaries. And I understand even the staff that were on duty could avail themselves of free beer. So, what could go wrong there? I think it's safe to say that a few parrots probably escaped out into the city during that time. But the fact is, probably more than any single release event, and there are many urban legends, and I love them all, really what has happened here is a slow and steady release over time. And so what we see is that when a new parrot species starts to show up in Los Angeles, it's because that parrot has become common in the pet trade, mostly coming from Mexico and other places in Latin America. And so it's really probably small numbers of escapes from pets, maybe intentional releases of people who just don't want their parrot anymore, combining with a few of these more major releases to form persisting flocks. So what you're seeing down here in the graph is the annual gross export of parrots through the years into the United States as a whole. The first red-crowned parrots, and now we're kind of zeroing in on some target species here. The first red-crowned parrots that were ever noted in the city were in 1963, and actually by my predecessor at the Moore Lab, the former curator, Bill Hardy. He was a very interesting character. He not only found the time to house parrots at the Moore Lab and study them, but he also started a jazz record label while he was here in Los Angeles that pressed many albums. So an interesting guy with a lot of eclectic interests. This was before email, which I think is probably what's taking up all my time and is the reason I can't start my own jazz record label. But what he did do was note the very first flock of red-crowned parrots in Pasadena, 1963. They were hanging out kind of on the periphery and a little bit distant from a flock of yellow-headed parrots. And this is going to play an important role later on, this sort of separation between the two. So at that time, it was just a handful, maybe two or three. Fast forward to today, nature takes its course. We have easily conservative estimate of 5,000 red-crowned parrots in the city. The 1980s were really the peak of the legal and illegal pet trade. But then things have persisted and even increased since then. And the red-crowned parrot has been joined by another close relative, the lilac-crowned parrot, which now numbers probably over 1,000 birds. So you can see that these parrots, with these really nice photographs, crystal clear directly from the side, basically how you will never see a parrot in the wild. These are pretty easy to tell apart, right? The red-crowned parrot has much more of a cherry red that goes further back on its head. The lilac-crowned has sort of a darker wine color or maroon-colored patch that doesn't go so far back. It's got more lilac on the crown. Another great mark that you almost never get to see in the field is the color of the bare skin that surrounds the nostril. That's called the cere. And the bare skin around the eye, dark in the lilac crowns, light colored in the red crowns. And then the scalloping on the feathers of the breast and belly is another good way tell them apart. Not so diagnostic, because sometimes the feathers of a red-crowned can have a bit of scalloping on them, and they can also appear ruffled. But sometimes this is the best look you're getting at a parrot as you're looking up into a tree, and the lilac crowns have much more scalloping on their feathers. So where these birds originally come from is Mexico. So they were trapped in their native ranges in Mexico and brought to Los Angeles, some of them as young birds, some of them as adults. They hail from different sides of the country. And I'm showing you just a little bit of their evolutionary tree here. These are all different species of Amazona parrot, or most of them. Down here, finchi and viridionalis. This is lilac-crowned and red-crowned. So what you can see is that they're each other's closest living relatives, but that's still pretty distant. We know that they actually diverged from each other over 1 million years ago. So they're kind of like long-lost cousins that are now on different parts of Mexico and have not come into contact or even been aware of each other's existence for probably over 1 million years. So one of the first questions we wanted to ask is how much are these parrots even running into each other in the city? Which is another way of saying how much are they inhabiting the same ecological space? Because this is going to dictate, if you're going to different coffee shops, you're going to different bookstores, long lost cousins are not going to run into each other. We wanted to find out how much are they inhabiting the same space, because that's going to dictate how much they interact. And to do that, we wanted to get an estimate of their ecological niche. And to do that, I'm just going to give you a little window into what we did. It's some kind of fancy stuff, but essentially what we did was take the GPS points of every single parrot we could find exactly where it was seen or collected. That was either in its native range or in Los Angeles. And from each one of those points, we extracted environmental data that either came from weather stations, like rainfall and temperature, or it came from remote sensing satellites of the kind that that JPL launches into space. And it collects information on things like tree cover and greenness and amount of vegetation. And we essentially cooked all that data down to look at the differences among the parrots in Los Angeles and the parrots in Mexico. So what I'm showing you here in this graph is just one variable, precipitation seasonality. So this is a metric of how variable is the rainfall throughout the year. Does it come all at one time and then it's dry the rest of the year, or is it evenly distributed? And so what you can see over here is that in Mexico, lilac-crowned parrots have a very seasonal rainfall regime. The rains come all at one time, and then it's very dry. Red-crowned parrots, not so much, more evenly distributed throughout the year. When we move into Los Angeles and we look at those two species, what we find is not only is that variable different from both of their native ranges, but it's also come to become almost the same with each other. So now they're inhabiting a place with the same precipitation seasonality, and it's different from where they came from. And this is really the story kind of across the board from variable to variable. And now what I'm going to show you is taking all the data we looked at and just kind of cooking it all down into one plot that we can kind of consider the ecological niche space of what these parrots are inhabiting. And so what I'm showing you here in the dotted lines are the niche space in Los Angeles for red-crowned and lilac-crowned. So once again, it's a narrow niche. It's different from their native niches that are the solid lines, and they're overlapping with each other. So the take home here was, yeah, these parrots, we do see them together in the city, but maybe it was that they were, kind of hanging out in different places and moving up, into the foothills or something like that, and the other species wasn't, but that's not the case. They really seem to be hanging out in the same places in Los Angeles, and those places are radically different from where they came from. So this is kind of interesting because it bears on the question of whether these parrots are going to spread beyond the city. And there was a big study of introduced birds in Europe from 2017. And what they found by looking at a whole bunch of introduced species was that the ability of an introduced bird to establish in a new area was really just related to the number of times that it got introduced there. Really nothing about whether it matched the niche at all. And this really kind of checks out with the parrots, right? There were many opportunities and many release events for them to get established, and eventually they did. But what it also said was that the ability of an introduced bird to spread beyond the place where it was first found is not related to how many times, but it's more related to the match between the ecological niche. And so this also seems to check out with the parrots. They don't have a very good match, and they don't seem to be spreading beyond the urban city into outlying areas or into the countryside or anything like that. So, you know, in a way, it's kind of the complete opposite of the story of the European starling. You're probably at least somewhat aware of this story, right? The much maligned Eugene Scheffelben, I think his name was, that wanted to introduce all of the birds from Shakespeare's plays into Central Park. And so it took a couple tries to get European starlings going. But once they did, they had such a nice match with Europe and temperate parts of North America that they just spread like wildfire across the country. And so the parrots don't seem to be doing that. So they're kind of stuck here in the city. I don't know how many of you are aficionados of the history of Los Angeles, but if you are, there's a very classic book written by Carrie McWilliams called Southern California, An Island on the Land. Wonderful book. So if you'll allow me the conceit that we can kind of consider Southern California an island, then the two species of parrots are kind of marooned here together, alone. It's a bit of a setup for a love story, right? In fact, I think there was a movie that was sort of based on that. I'm not sure this movie would really hold up in today's market. So why don't we just scrap that and replace it with something a little more timeless, and in fact was the source of the title that I had. We'll always have Paris. No, we'll always have parrots. This joke was given to me by a friend of mine, Bob, when we went on to, a trip to Peru together. And so I asked him if I could use it, and he granted me permission. I saw that another member of that trip, Lori Gillis, is watching on, and I give a shout out to her. So we've got this sort of tension, right? Will they or won't they, now that we know that they're in the city together, inhabiting the same places? To answer the question of whether they were hybridizing, we needed to get a baseline of what the genetic differences were like in their native ranges. And this is where it comes in really, really handy to be the curator of a Mexican bird collection. And so this collection is pretty cool. You got a little intro to it in my intro. It was started really in the 1920s by Robert T. Moore, who he moved to Los Angeles from the East Coast, and he wanted to study the birds of Mexico. And so he hired a professional collector named Chester Lamb, who previous to this time was a road marker for B.F. Goodrich, going around collecting birds around California while he was knocking in road signs. Moore hired him to cruise around Mexico for 22 years, collecting birds and sending them back to Moore. And so by the time he was done, not only had they discovered multiple new species, like the glorious tufted jay right here, but Lamb and Moore had put together well over 50,000 specimens that eventually came to Occidental College. So I love museum collections. Obviously, I'm the curator of a museum collection. I'm a big advocate of them as portals to the past. I know it may be a little disturbing for some to see a bunch of parrots laid out like this. Of course, they were collected from many different times in many different places, and that scientific collecting did not harm their overall population numbers, which were able to be restocked. But what they are is basically windows and portals into the past. And so, you know, who could have guessed back in Moore and Lamb's day, DNA, while it had been discovered, was not known to be the hereditary molecule. So they never could have imagined that we'd be able to extract that molecule, hereditary molecule, out of these old specimens and use it to study those birds that they were collecting. So one of the reasons I really love museum specimens, you never know what they're going to have to offer. So I'm going to sort of gloss over some of the genetic techniques and some of the details behind them, but suffice it to say that we extracted DNA out of these specimens and we sequenced large portions of the parrot's genome, and then we overlaid them with each other to try to locate sites, DNA sites that were always different between the red-crowned parrots and the lilac-crowned parrots, so that we would have basically diagnostic DNA differences that you could always say, if you found this site, you knew it was a lilac-crowned or a red-crowned. And when we did that, we found 214 DNA sites that fit the bill. Then we needed parrots from Los Angeles, right? And so we got our hands on 22 modern parrot specimens. These were ones that were found dead in the city, and these were also ones that were donated to us by our good friends at SoCal Parrot. This is a wildlife rehabilitation facility specifically for parrots. And although they do a wonderful job of rehabbing the parrots, sometimes the ones that are brought in are too far gone and they don't make it. And so those have been donated to us for our scientific study. I also need to tell you the story of a parrot named Billy. This was a parrot that died on Occidental College's campus. A poor undergraduate student was just inside the library, studying peacefully and quietly next to a picture glass window, when all of a sudden Billy came storming in and slammed right into the window right in front of her. And by the time anyone arrived, Billy was sadly stone dead on the pavement. And so when we got our hands on this, the bird's name, we called it Billy. I have no idea why. When we took a look, though, we saw that Billy was a pretty interesting looking hybrid parrot. So it had features of both red-crowned and lilac-crowned in terms of scalloping and the color of the bare parts, and sort of an interesting thing going on with the crown. And so what that meant was that hybrids were out there, and were we going to find them in our sample of 22 parrots? So I'm just going to quickly walk you through what you're seeing here with this type of genetic analysis. Over here, we have the lilac-crowned parrots from Mexico. These are the ones that had 214 sites that were all lilac-crowned. Each line here is an individual parrot. And then on the axis down here, these are individual birds. Over here on the right side, you're seeing the red-crowned parrots that are from Mexico. What I'm going to reveal now is Billy. Billy, you can see, is half red-crowned and half lilac-crowned in his DNA. So he was a total and complete hybrid. Now you might say to yourself, okay, so that means Billy's parent was a red-crowned parrot. One of them was a red-crowned parrot and one of them was a lilac-crowned parrot. Pure types of both. But we would expect a certain thing if Billy's parents were pure types of each species. So parrot DNA is a little bit different from human DNA, but it's not so different because they still have 2 copies of every chromosome. And they give one of them to each of their offspring, just like humans do. And so if Billy's parents were pure types, then one chromosome would be red-crowned and one chromosome would be lilac-crowned. And therefore, at each of those 214 sites that we looked at, you should see one red and one lilac at each of the 214 sites. But that's not at all what we saw. In fact, it looked like Billy's chromosomes were kind of mixed up copies of red-crowned and lilac-crowned. And so what that meant is that Billy's parents had to themselves at least be partially hybrids, which means this hybridization story had to go back probably several generations. Billy's parents were hybrids too. So, this kind of leads into the question of how we sort of figure all this out, and how certain parrots can sort of end up with just a sliver of DNA from one type. They can be mostly red-crowned and have a sliver of lilac-crowned DNA. So kind of follow with me as we walk through the generations here. At some point in time, we do have a pure red-crowned parrot that mates with a pure lilac-crowned parrot and produces what we call an F1, or first generation offspring. It's got one whole chromosome from one whole chromosome from the other. This is the case, if you have had children, this is the case with your kids. One chromosome from mom, one chromosome from dad. However, those chromosomes then recombine. So maybe I got to take you back to high school biology here. You remember that chromosomes actually cross over with each other and share little bits of DNA. Not of your parents, but of their parents. And so you end up with these little combinations. And so then if that offspring goes on to mate with a pure red-crowned parrot and you get more recombination, then you would have even less lilac-crowned DNA. And if that were to happen again, it would cross over and recombine, and it would cut out a few more pieces of that lilac-crowned DNA, and you'd have even less. And so through the generations, you can actually get parrots that just have a little sliver of lilac-crowned DNA or red-crowned. Perhaps you've heard the news that we all, or most of us anyways, have like 1 or 2% Neanderthal DNA in us. And this is basically the mechanism through which that happened as well. So, okay. We've got Billy there. Now I'm going to reveal the rest of the modern parrots that we sampled from Los Angeles. And what you can see is that most of them actually were not like Billy. Most of them, all these parrots here, were mostly pure one type or the other. Either they were mostly pure lilac-crowned or they were mostly pure red-crowned, with just a few other ones that were like Billy, being serious hybrid parrots. We can kind of take another look at this at a very fine-grained scale. I think I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but here you're seeing the Mexican lilac crowns. Here you're seeing the Mexican red crowns. And now I'm revealing again all of the Southern California parrots. What you can see here is that even the ones that are mostly pure, if you go into an individual DNA site, you might find that it has a lilac-crowned type for that site, even though it's mostly red. So there are these parrots out there that are almost pure types with just a tiny little bit of DNA from the other type. Basically, there is no completely pure parrot in Los Angeles right now. So I'm pointing out here, these are the ones that look like hybrids. All of the rest of these do not look like hybrids at all. They look like pure one type or the other when you look at them physically. So I just want to do a quick summary here of the genetics. Hybrids are obviously possible. We've seen them. They're out there. And all parrots do have a little bit, at least, of hybrid DNA, but most have very, very little. And so the question becomes, why aren't there more parrots like Billy out there that are serious hybrids? And so what we wanted to know, and what we think was going to be the answer to this question, is what are the parrots doing out there? How are they interacting? They're in the same places, but is there some reason why they might not be hanging out with each other? So to answer that question, we turned to a citizen science or community science project that was started in the lab called FLAP, the Free Flying Los Angeles Parrot Project. You always got to have a good acronym, right? So FLAP is great because it's not just us out there observing the parrots. Observing parrots is hard. If we were running around doing it, it would take all of our time and effort. But we can leverage the efforts of people like you who go out and take photographs and then upload them to community science platforms like eBird, but also like iNaturalist, which is the one we use. We use iNaturalist because it requires photos, and we can actually go in and verify whether we think a bird is a hybrid or not. So what I'm showing you here is a great observation of two red-crowned, or what looks like red-crowned parrots hanging out together. Here are some lovely pictures of two lilac-crowned parrots that appear to be pair bonding. This, well, it looks to me like a red-crowned parrot with at least something that looks like a lilac-crowned, or maybe a little bit hybridy, because it's got the light eye ring, but it's also got a crown that looks more like a lilac crown. And when those two get together, they can form things that are hybrids. So here's a really weird looking hybrid parrot. A little bit dark on the crown, not so extensive, light eye ring, dark cere. It's got a lot of stuff going on that suggests it is a hybrid parrot. So we wanted to know specifically, maybe there was something in the behavior of the parrots that was leading to interspecies pairs, so that red-crowned and lilac-crowned, to come together less often than we would expect. So I'm going to throw a little math at you again. You didn't know that there was going to be math involved in this talk tonight, but I'm sorry. I'm an evolutionary biologist, so I have to do it to you. What we need first is to know the frequencies of the parrots that are out there. And so we know from census records, and we can also count up on iNaturalist, that about 83% of the parrots are red-crowned and 17% of them are lilac-crowned. It's about a 5-to-1 split out there. Then, if joining is just random between pairs of parrots, then we can just use some simple proportions and equations to predict the pairs that we would see out there. How often should we see a red-crowned with a red-crowned? Well, it's just the proportion of finding a red-crowned and finding another red-crowned. 69% of the pairs should be red-crowned. By the same math, only 3% of the pairs should be lilac-crowned. And for the interspecies pair, here you got to do it a little tricky. One joining the other, but then it can happen the opposite way too, where a lilac-crowned joins a red-crowned, and so you need to add those together, 14, 14, to get it 28%. You'll notice conveniently these add up to 100%. Very nice. So the question is, this is the expected percentage of interspecies pairs that we could count up on iNaturalist. What did we observe? We observed much, much less, only about 11 or 12%. So it seemed like the two species were joining each other a lot less than you would think. And this points to some measure of behavioral isolation, as we call it, between them. They are just not preferring to hang out with each other. Birds of a feather flock together. They want to hang out with their own kind. And so what happens here is that although hybrids do occasionally happen, they're pretty rare, and they tend to mix back with whatever type they end up looking more like. And so this is cool, right? I mean, this is how you end up with a lot of parrots that look like one type, but maybe have a sliver of DNA from the other kind. And this also tracks all the way back to Bill Hardy's original observations of the red-crowned parrots when they first got established, were hanging out with some yellow-headed parrots, but they weren't really mixing with that flock. And it turned out that observation, anecdotal though it was, really the whole story was there. And as we collected data, we found that he was right. These species just are choosing not to hang out with each other. One thing we really want to know is, how do the hybrids fare? When they do happen, do they survive as well as pure birds? Do they find mates as well? Maybe they're not being preferred in the mating game. And that could also explain why they're more rare. It needs study. We need people studying the parrots in Los Angeles. Another thing I want to bring up is the very interesting idea of ghost parrots. So what we have here is a situation where we found a genetic signal that we couldn't quite explain in red-crowned parrots. It didn't belong to that species, but it also didn't line up with lilac-crowned parrots. And so what we think is that this ghost parrot that we couldn't quite explain might be another Amazona species in Los Angeles that we didn't sample for our study, specifically yellow-headed parrots. We know that yellow-headed parrots were the very first Amazona on the scene in the 1950s. These were the ones being released in the Bel Air fire. They were pretty numerous, and then they've been declining with the rise of red-crowned parrots and lilac-crowned parrots. But they might have contributed DNA early on, and they might still be contributing DNA today. You can see from this paired, this mixed species pair of red-crowned and yellow-headed seen recently in the city. So what we want to do moving forward is expanded sampling. There's 26 parakeet species that are out there in Los Angeles today. There's 6 in the genus Amazona. We want more individuals. We want more species so we can begin to understand this complex genomic landscape of hybridization that's going on. So finally, I want to end by just talking a little bit about the implications for conservation of wild parrots. Both species are critically endangered in Mexico, and probably there are more in Southern California than there are in the wild. And so there's been sort of fanciful talk that maybe we can use the ones in Los Angeles as a rescue population to reseed Mexico should we ever need it. But our study puts a little bit of a cautionary note there by saying that, yeah, okay, these have not all mixed into one big hybrid swarm yet, but there really are no pure parrots out there in Los Angeles. So what we really need to be doing is probably officially monitoring the parrots in SoCal to better understand them. And for the moment, at least, the best way to conserve the parrots is to protect them in their native range. So what you can do to help with this project is contribute photos to FLAP on iNaturalist. You can find any photo that you take of a parrot in our geographic orbit is going to get automatically drawn into the project. You don't even have to do anything. All you have to do is take a picture of a parrot and upload it to iNaturalist. Of course, if you find a dead parrot and it's in good condition, we would really like to have it. So get in touch. You can support our wonderful partners at SoCal Parrot, who are rehabbing injured parrots that come in and re-releasing them. And you can also find organizations working to protect habitat and working to stop the legal and illegal pet trade in Mexico. And finally, what you can do is send your ornithologically interested young people to Occidental College so they can study along with us. We need them. Send us your undergrads. We have this wonderful new facility with this incredible mural painted by Jane Kim of Inkdwell Studios. We have an incredible new DNA Genomics Center with all the latest equipment, all part of the Anderson Center of Environmental Science. And our students have been going on to great things, prestigious fellowships and graduate school. So do get in touch if you have someone who is interested in birds and thinking about college. There's Jane Kim painting the lilac-crowned parrot. One other thing I want to mention unrelated to the parrot project is we also study live birds, including dead ones, at the Moore Lab. And we have this new migratory area. We've set up a monitoring station at Bear Divide. This is being run by Dr. Ryan Terrell in the Moore Lab. It's a place where you can go and see birds migrating out of Los Angeles as they head north. And you can also follow along when the counts are happening live and online at www.beardivide.org. Sometimes you can see 2,500 birds in a morning. We've had some mornings last year where 10,000 birds were counted. So with that, I will say thank you so much for listening, and I am happy to take any questions you might have.
He did it all by himself. You got it unshared. Thank you.
I got it unshared.
I think we had a couple of questions come in on chat. Marianne, you want to?
Yeah, just right off the bat, John, I wanted to ask, what is that bird on the logo of the Moore Lab? Is that the tufted jay from Mexico, or what is that?
Indeed it is. Yeah, it is the tufted jay. And that is a bird that is, it's a jay that is unlike any other jay in Mexico. So when Lamb and Moore first saw this bird in the 1930s, they knew that it was a new species. Of course, they were discovering it new to Western science. Indigenous peoples knew that these birds were there for centuries. But somehow Nelson and Goldman on their expeditions in Mexico in the late 1800s had missed it. They just kind of went everywhere around the range of the tufted jay. And so it was left for Moore and Lamb to discover in the 1930s.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Joanne asked, which species of parrots is most endangered in Mexico, and does that correlate with populations in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I would say that the red-crowned parrot is probably the most endangered. Its geographic range is the smallest. You might remember from the slide, the lilac crowns kind of go all the way down the coast of Mexico, but red crowns are really geographically restricted, and they've been hit pretty hard. So their numbers are probably in the low thousands, if that.
Okay, all right.
Oh, but to address the question of does that correlate with Los Angeles,
Yeah.
the right side there is that that's the most common one in Los Angeles. So
Okay.
that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
All
there's a silver lining.
Yeah. All right. Dave Weesoff asked, do wild parrots find enough to eat in LA? And then he subsequently asked if there's a difference in their diet and foraging habits.
Yeah, there has to be. It has not been closely studied, but Kimball Garrett has done enough poking around to know that they are feeding off of some of the large exotic fruit trees. So kind of fortunately, I guess, again, fortunately, the parrots have this exotic smorgasbord of introduced trees that are also available to them. And, they behave kind of similarly to their native areas in the sense that they find these large fruiting trees and feed at them en masse. So I would say they are getting enough food. This is not a bird like a pigeon that is going down and eating like, people's scraps off a patio. It's eating wild fruits and things off the trees and flowers and stuff like that. But they seem to be doing pretty well. They have been expanding over the last 10 years.
Okay. All right. How do you know, this is from Don White, there are no red-crowned or lavender-crowned, pure parrots in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I was probably being a little loose with that in the sense that there certainly could be out there there probably still is a bit of an influx of birds coming in illegally from Mexico that are finding their way out into the wild. And I think that those could be pure types. But we looked across 22 birds, and it's only 22. We would love to expand out our sample, and we did not find a single bird that was pure at every single DNA site. Everyone had at least a couple DNA pieces of the other species. So that's what we're going on for now.
Okay. All right. Beth Leviton asks, what about the San Francisco Telegraph Hill parrots? How are they related?
Yeah, those are the red-masked parakeets, I think. Yeah, they're not in this genus. So hold on a second. Let me go to my talk really quick here. Yeah, I think those are the red-masked or red-crowned or red-masked or mitered parakeets. I think that's right. So yeah, those ones are not closely related. They're in a totally different genus than these guys.
Okay, and so they tend to stay up in the Bay Area. We don't see them down here.
Yeah, same deal. They probably got introduced, a couple times and then they stuck, but they don't match really their native habitat, and so they're not going anywhere.
Mhm. Okay. Amy asks, is there a problem with poaching given that they aren't protected species? Is there any push to get them protected?
That's a good question, and I think there is some evidence that people are trapping them here in the city, going up and finding nests, taking nestlings out of the nest, and then reselling them here in the city. That is a thing, and because they are not protected, I still don't think that that is legal to do that, but it's not the same amount of illegality as if they were on the endangered species list or something. So they are not availed of sort of the full protections that many native birds are.
Okay. Mark Osako asks, he states that hybrid viability is a big issue. Have there been any attempts at captive breeding, interbreeding to get a handle on the issue, e.g. hatching success, etc.?
Yeah, no, I mean, nothing scientific. I'll bet down at SoCal Parrot, you could do some interesting observations because they do keep them in mixed species areas. But yeah, nobody has looked at how the hybrids do, and it would be very interesting to know, and it could be the key to the question.
So in SoCal Parrots in San Diego, right? It's down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Kind of in between.
All right. Gail Burkholder says, what kind of parrot is most common in the South Bay? She was wondering if they were some kind of conures.
Down in the South Bay.
Like Hawthorne and Redondo Beach and that
Palos Verdes.
Palos Verdes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely red-crowned and yellow-headed parrots down there, and probably a couple other species.
Okay. All right. Robin Scher asks, are there behavior differences between the different types?
That's a good question. They definitely sound a little bit different. Their vocalizations are sort of different. They look a bit different in flight. I can show you actually. I'm just going to reshare really quick a slide here, if I may. And we've got a red-crowned on the left and a lilac-crowned on the right. The tail's shorter on the lilac-crowned, and they just sort of, the lilac-crown's got a little bit more feel of a head-forward situation, like this feels a little more off balance, I would say, whereas the red-crowns are, feel a little more symmetrical in terms of where their wings are with respect to their body. As for other types of behavior, again, it has not been well studied. So I'm going to stop share there. I see one question I want to get to from Joey Curdy. Can I say it out loud? He asks, why do you suspect the yellow-headed parrots are responsible for the ghost parrot genotypes you see? Are they the next most closely related species? Around when did they diverge from lilac and red-crowned parrots? So they are not the next most closely related. That would be red lord, which also does exist in LA, but in pretty low numbers. They are millions of years divergent, the yellow-headeds. But you can find birds on iNaturalist that definitely look like hybrids between yellow-headeds and red-crowns. So we're pretty sure they're out there. And they've also been around each other and hanging out the longest and in the highest numbers. So in the 1960s and 70s, it was basically yellow-headeds and red-crowns that were the main parrot species in the city. And then yellow-headeds have dwindled.
Okay.
So at this point, it's circumstantial, and we want to, get the scientific genomic evidence behind it.
Okay. And what are the biggest threats to LA parrots besides people poaching them?
Windows. I mean, yeah, windows certainly take out a lot of parrots. Several have come in that we've seen that have been shot with BB guns. I mean, I think that goes beyond poaching to just people not liking them and thinking they raise a racket and just trying to take them out.
Mm.
So yeah, one that we prepared the other day that had come from SoCal Parrot had many small BBs in it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then aside from that, mostly there are observations about, mitered parrots, or parakeet in Los Angeles on the west side. And looks like red masked parakeets in the Pasadena area.
Yep.
And yellow chevroned parakeets in the south.
Yep.
And yeah.
I have a couple of questions that are kind of let's take a closely related question first. And that is, what's the main habitat threat in Mexico?
Their main habitat
Well,
in Mexico.
yeah, what's the main threat to their survival in Mexico? Is it just loss of habitat by being overrun, forests being overrun? Is that the...
Yeah, it's poaching. Although, they've attempted to curb that. I'd say it's not as crazy rampant maybe as it was in the free-for-all of the 70s and 80s. But still, parrots and all kinds of wild birds are getting taken for the pet trade all the time. We were down in Veracruz 2 summers ago, and had some people come up on a motorcycle and go off into the forest with their bags and nets, and they said they were looking for a lost cow, but we know that they were bird hunting. So poaching is still going on, and also habitat loss. Yeah, those are the 2 big threats.
So my second question has to do with your drawer full of skins that you were showing.
Yeah.
And coming back to the Feather Thief
Yes.
book, is that any threat? Is your population under any threat from that source?
I mean, you always have to be vigilant in any sort of resource you have that is a major resource. You have to be vigilant. So, we don't really have many of those species that people are after, but we do a darn good job with our security.
Good.
And we don't tell people about what we do either. So, yeah.
Okay, so unless there's other burning questions, I really wanted to thank you. It was great. I really enjoyed it. We're coming up right on time here. And I'll certainly go look at your website. I'd like to see about it. You were talking about this mountain where you could see a lot of migration there. Is that something that are group tours or bird walks are led through?
Yeah, I mean, it's really one site.
Mm-hmm.
You stand there and you watch the birds go by.
Okay.
It's really quite nice. You can see the schedule for when the counting is happening on the website.
Okay.
And people have been going up in scattered handfuls, 2, 3, 5, 6. I think a big group of 20 people would probably not be a good idea right now. But if the individuals want to come up and coordinate their efforts to see it, I say go for it.
Okay. Any special times the best?
Oh, right at dawn. Yeah, to the best stuff, I would get there at 6:30, 7:30. And I would first maybe take a look to see that the counting's happening.
Right.
And you can actually see in real time on the site. You go to a link and you can see the birds being counted and which species are being seen. And so you can know it's going on. It's not a bad weather day up there, and head up.
Okay. And
Yeah. Or you could email me to coordinate something a little bit more, official.
Yay.
sounds great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. That's
Yeah.
very nice. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Gonna let Paula close.
She had herself and she was applauding in the so, Okay. Okay, let me,
Mute her, I guess.
I can try. Let's see.
There she is. She's right there.
Right.
I'm fine.
Okay,
Okay,
good. We
All
were
right.
just,
I had such a great time. It was a great talk. Thank you very much for setting this up. I don't know if Joanne's still on, but it was great.
yeah,
okay,
Anyway, good, well done. Good questions. Thank you so much.
okay.
take care.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.